Tonight I'll be reading from my latest collection, Rotura, which is out from Black Lawrence Press. The name of the book, Rotura, is Spanish for break, for rupture, and I'll just share a quick story about the title. It wasn't the original title of the manuscript. I actually sent this book to a couple of people for blurbs, and only one got back to me, but it was Juan Felipe Herrera, the former U.S. Poet Laureate, and he read the book. He's a sweet guy. He read the book, and I think the original title for the book was a line from one of his poems, and so it was this kind of mix of like modesty, but also power, it felt, because he was like, no, I don't, I appreciate the nod to my work, but I think Rotura is your title because so many of the poems deal with breaking. And I was just like, well, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna second guess a former poet laureate. So I was like, all right, very well, very well. So it was both humble and a flex. So but yeah, this book, I'm going to read you the opening poems and the last poem as part of my whole reading, but I'm going to start with the first poem in the book. The book is bookended by poems before the 2016 election, and then a poem after the 2016 election. So just if you're wondering which election I could be talking about. All right, set my timer. This first poem is called "The Question Before the Election." My mother asks me if I've heard of the KKK. A month later, the election will turn in favor of a man endorsed by them. A month later, my wife and I will begin unpacking how we represent what is not wanted here. Give us not your disabled nor woman, not brown skin of self and family and families. A month later, we will grow quiet, swiping at screens to refresh reality, hoping the next flash of text and pixels will give us a reason to speak above a mumbled, grit-lined whisper, to move the air beyond the pause of remembering to breathe. Because she's heard of a man who brings the worst out of people, because she wants to warn me, but is years late to shield me from history, from threats and sideways glances, outright glares, from nights of glass bottles broken behind me, thrown from cars crammed with frat boys yelling, "Go back to your country." My mother asks if I've heard of the KKK. A year later, I will be thinking of lists in poems, what it is one inventories, makes space for, stops to see in lists. A year later, I would list different things my mother and I are years late for. Like me asking what it was like for her when she first came to this country, or her asking me why I write, why I teach, why I do anything but hide and stay quiet, like she asked me to be as a child. A year later, I will have been walking, looking over my shoulder for more than 30 years. The man I am, looking over my shoulder, not noticing that I marched behind the youth I was, who starved himself and hoped to disappear, too busy looking over his shoulder to know he marched behind the teen I was, in black t-shirts, who kept checking and correcting his English and hating his skin, too in his head and looking over his shoulder to know he marched behind the child I was, alone in garage apartments, staring out the windows at trees and cars, ducking down when a cop car passed and closing his eyes. A year later, it will hit me that these years of looking over my shoulder are a list inside me that inventory makes space for, stop to see the fear inside me. My mother asks if I've heard of the KKK, and I feel the worst has found its way into my palm. The worst has me clutching it, hearing it sounded out in my mother's voice. And I know then what I hold in my hands will continue to grow heavy. What I hold in my hand trembles when I cry. My wife cries. Friends tell me they cried. When I remember in a hushed, hurried voice, as if we were calling to each other from different parts of a dark wood, wanting to both call out and be found, but also not draw attention. My mother asking me, "Has oído del KKK?" I feel failure, desengaño, loss, decepción, breakdown, caída, defeat, quebrado, collapse, rotura, frustration, amargura, grief. Bueno, pues, sí. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. I feel like we've got a lot of poets in the room, so I'm just gonna like the real breakthrough with that poem was getting to the list of words. Like I talked about lists in the poems, and I'm like, why don't I have a list of words in there? So that was a fun breakthrough. It took me a couple years. This next poem is a 4-part poem. It's a bit of a lyric sequence. It's called Four Dirges. And it's in kind of in conversation with T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. T.S. Eliot, an underground poet, you may not have heard of him. Slowly, his name's getting around. But he had this line in the Four Quartets, which I read that in like 2005. And this line stuck to me. It's from the Dry Salvages. And so the epigraph of this poem is, I don't know about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. And I thought, like, that's both a really dope set of like way to open up a poem, but also like, what do you mean it's a brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable? Like, it's basically like when I read my reviews from different places I've worked at where it says like, oh, he's really smart, but he's got a bad attitude. So I'm just like, so I kind of riff on, I kind of talk to him in this, answer his four quartets with my four dirges. And here we go. This is the first one, Rio Grande, Rio Bravo dirge. Thomas, it's true you don't know about gods, beaten and worn like the space left between paired jigsaw puzzle pieces, where a child has tried and tried to force the wrong piece in. You might have known about gods who linger, who know lighten bolts, who know bargains and carry swords. But I think you lacked the capacity to notice their lack of capacity, to harbor and be a hand, to shade our eyes. Shaded now, you don't know, and died not knowing the slosh of gods and the dark gleam of gods that reflect clean-off badges, hot overpaid hearts. This river god who rears and waits in place like a door left ajar, God that moves and darkens, this is not a being of your thoughts. Water dirge. Tom, do you know that before boundaries were decided between men separating Mexico and the United States, there was water? Before the city lights made us forget the stars, and before the desert was made a road, and before people crammed into trucks and were called cargo, called nothing back there, officer, there was water. Do you think water is an argument waged between two gods? Think, where I believe, water is blood spilt between two gods. Do you think, as I do, that I might mean split instead of spilt? Do you know much about the silence, so much like a river, when I've been seen as sullen, untamed, and intractable? Nueces River Dirge. Tommy, is your strong brown god also this chosen river split from brother by distance and legislation, river that empties into Corpus Christi Bay? No, I know you spoke of the Ohio, and I know that river too. But what would you call the hard waters of my home city? What blessings for us who offer up nothing but faces can you think of? What looks back when we hold water in our hands and wait? A moment of dark mirror. That we are then made in the image of what we cannot utter, that we are lost in clouded lifelines as we stand outside a door we've had no hand in making. Corpus Dirge, December 2016. T. When the water was contaminated in Corpus, I did not consider gods, did not know them or think them able to help my family, who already had bottled water in bulk. My mother, who made sure her sons didn't drink from the tap, who attempted to shower with bottled water a few times, only to have to give up, her arms giving out after double shifts of work. When the water was tainted and I took the time to look up maps, traced by zip code the neighborhoods cut off from water, noted that where they lived, my family would live without service for some time. Same for the neighborhoods we used to live in, from Leopard to Greenwood, and yet water had been restored to areas I never saw until I had started driving and would detour through ritzy residentials, or so they seemed at 16. When it was tainted, I knew water had given off light like roads made of glass before I was born, knew that water bore and took in all that fell long before I'd fallen off the map I traced over, trying to think and find any thin reassurance. When the water was tainted, it remained water and would remain water, and all the words wearing down in meaning are my family, history, are part of my story. Mr. Eliot, before I was born, you wrote about a strong brown God. But what are gods when there is water in rivers who have nothing to do with what isn't already a part of them? If the river is within us, then why did I fear it killing those I loved? Why do gods beyond belief, knowledge, and thought scrawl out of me, awkward, reverent, and dying? Thank you, thank you. There's a couple of longer poems in this book, which are fun to read. Uh, but I do have some shorter poems in here, and this next one I specifically wanted to read tonight because the first couple of drafts of it came from Oregon, and you know it because there's blackberries in it, and I miss y'all's blackberries. I miss Nancy's yogurt, straight up. Like we don't they don't got that out here. um, Let's see. And at one point, at this half of this poem kind of, I mean, the whole poem takes place in memory, but the half of this poem takes place in one of the cemeteries near the U of O campus. So go Ducks. Can we say that? I can say that here. All right. In the margins with blackberries. I feel dirty eating them, plucking them off the fence along the cemetery after work. No one else comes to eat them. Before I bite down, I let each berry linger on my tongue, the styles prickling, reaching out from the flesh. Who can help what the body remembers? What bristle and burn? What colors? Not the seasons, not the birds that follow, not the leaves finding themselves flickering, then falling. I walk past graves of people I have never known, and I think of friends I have, of how I have never walked past their graves, of who might be doing so now. Rubbing my darkened fingers against my jeans, no one's around, but I hurry anyway. Why let them dry up, burst? Let their sweetness linger on my fingers. Let them ask for my attention. Just a few more hours. I believe that's what they call synesthesia, right? You're mixing the senses. This next poem that I want to read is the kind of the poem that is like definitely a keystone poem in the book, and probably the first, I think the first poem that I wrote towards this manuscript. There's some other older poems in here, but and I was invited by terrain.org to do a letter to America. They, as soon as the 2016 election went how it went, Simmons Button reached out and yeah, I was invited to and reached out to a lot of poets in their community to do these poems and essays, like these letters to America. And this is mine. And let's see. At one point, I quote a poet in this, and the poet is Faiz Ahmad Faiz. And I'm talking to a friend of mine who translates him. So anyway, this poem is called American Studies. My wife tells me of reading the Dear America books as a child, those stories told via the diaries of young women who lived during difficult times in American history. In these stories filled with suffering were the facts behind the suffering. Her favorite involved the RMS Titanic, the unsinkable ship that sank. I ask if trying to imagine what it looked like, what captivated. And she says no. Says only one book led to another until she realized she could never see it nor accept it. After the election, my friend explains he feels he could manage here, but not his children. He explains he spoke to their school director, who comforted by talking about police presence. But if there's police, he asks, before anything happens, what will happen when something does? American algebra. Everything is X until proven Y. Dear America, if X represents what my friend feels thinking about the police, what language do you imagine he worries his children speaking publicly? And what language are we speaking now? Show your work. Another friend writes to me, here's a verse I think about a lot. And maybe the mirror of the world will clear once again. She shares she's been sick since the election, as I've been. I imagine our voices trying to commiserate between coughs. In physics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. What American physics happens here as I read and hear her voice behind the verse she sent? Are you, dear America, afraid as I am that our faces will no longer be there when the mirror clears? Thank you, thank you. This next poem is one of the longer poems in the manuscript. Let me take a sip here. And it's actually, well, it's interesting. I didn't plan this. I just kind of went with my intuition and tagged a bunch of poems that I want to make sure to read to y'all. And but that last poem I read is the first poem I wrote towards this manuscript, and this is the last one that I wrote. I felt like the book was missing. As I mentioned, the beginning of the book and the end of the book have these kind of question poems around the election, and they're centered around conversations with my mother. But I needed a middle poem, I realized as I was wrapping up the book. And so I worked towards this. This was kind of a gift for me. And it all came from this quote from Czesław Miłosz, the Polish poet. When it hurts, we return to the banks of certain rivers. And I love that. It's such a heavy line. When it hurts, we return to the banks of certain rivers. Like, how can, it's so, what's the word, grounded, earthy even. And I believe the poem that he wrote that the line comes from is called I Sleep a Lot. So imagine writing a poem, like if I gave you all the prompt, write a poem with the title I Sleep a Lot, we would go in all sorts of directions. Maybe melatonin would be mentioned, maybe it would for me, like, but he went to this line. I'm like, that's amazing. And here's my modest gift from that. This poem is entitled Certain Rivers. When a river's crossed, how many families hold their breath? Breath made rivers they cannot keep inside, one after another, the only thought, adelante. Later, with children, with hours of work wearing down the body, these breath-made rivers run through dreams and stories they tell their children not to voice. Small faces hold still, while questions begin to course and shadows dam the back of the throat. I have made a myth of our river. In telling the myth, one river becomes many rivers. The one my mother crossed, lost in the one I cross now in ink. You can't step into the same river twice, but you can try. The sound will grow, will lap and splash, sound of a displacement, sound of will, of wanting, in your mind, sound of steps going nowhere. Water knows how to be lost, has a need for it. Just watch. The rain is all scramble and clearing of tracks. Watch a napkin over a puddle. How water goes for broke to be lost, clings, rises, soaks the fabric, pretending part, like it does in clouds that grow, give, and clear. Shadow is a kind of water in that it knows one way to be lost. Just wait, it says, just wait. Water knows its way to truth. You can see what lies at the bottom of rivers. You can wash away the dirt to see your hands again. Water is, then, not the truth, but a way to it. Shadow, then, is not a lie, but something also passing over truth. Down the street at noon, you cannot look around without seeing others making the same strained face. A country also knows its way to truth, but can choose to pass over it. In this country of water and shadow, truth is strained from our faces. My mother turns to water on the phone. The river of her voice carries the years between us, years where I have strained to catch something of our changing faces. The river of her voice is a kind of truth I know. I see what lies at the bottom of these years. I wash away the dirt, see my hands tremble. Water knows how to be lost, has a need for it, but it cannot choose. A river runs to ocean and is not lost, just ocean. A river runs dry and is lost, you think, but later it returns. And only then do you ask, what is a river? But you never answer, happy to have the river. People know how to be lost to others. Crossing rivers helps. People know, but they must choose. And even then, they are not lost to themselves. Mother, you brought me with you over water, over a way to truth, over the distance of your shadow, and in shadows now we wait for the other to call. Sometimes she calls in tears, and like an earthworm when the rain comes and fills its burrow, a part of me works itself out to the surface to breathe. I can hear the water in her words, flooding sentences of love and regret, cloud what I know how to say. Whatever actual clouds in the distance between her and I, rearrange as she continues to break and give herself over to the 10 or 15 minutes it takes to grieve that one cannot grieve. No hay tiempo, mijo, tus hermanos, esta casa nunca está limpia, ¿no ves? Cuida bien esa niña tuya. Lo siento, no hablamos suficiente, deberíamos, gente muere, ¿sabes? I know. This voice from other nights, other cold moments when I've stopped in my life to listen, drummed out from the dirt of where I live and made to gleam like rain and worms, glass bottle shards, the hard face of a television clicked off to leave a house quiet, but for the pleading half whisper, half snore of a woman with no time to grieve. I apologize, my Oregonians, because you're like, rain? Why are you writing about rain? We have enough of the rain. You don't have to write about it. But oh man, those 7 years, a lot of rain poems. I feel like there's always a part of me that's damp from walks in the rain in Oregon. I love that. Oh, and here, I'm not even, this isn't even a joke. We actually, before we moved out here to Massachusetts, we, me and my partner, traded cars with my in-laws. And so our car right now, this 2005 Honda Civics, like they'll last. When you can't rock a Subaru, get yourself a Honda Civic. But it still has moss from Oregon. No joke. You know how moss grows on things out there. Like we still got Oregon moss, PNW. All right, I'm gonna read, I believe, 3 more poems. I want to make sure to get to all the Oregon related poems. So I think it's going to be 2 Huzzles and then the last poem. So 3 more poems. This poem is called Night Matter. In a house without electricity, what matters is having clean paper and enough light for words. Crouched at the window by the street lamp's light, I write. When the light clicks off, ask my hand if it matters. Even when I can't tell what word lies at my fingers, I know the force and heat is my matter. My eyes make out the paper as a glow registered by some animal sense that makes it matter. The night sky fills with bits of shell and bone, or so I write in ink, in night matter. Since men learned print, no night is wholly black. Since I learned night, my print is holy matter. Robert Frost spoke of being acquainted with the night. Having words with it, neither wrong nor right, is another matter. You who read and move on to other matters, the night knows who between us must do the dying. This poem is called Disrepair. I turn to another blank page and write, the rain falls from the sky in disrepair. Oregon walks through fog into more fog. Does the heart, like mist, repair? In Pentaminti, you glimpse what came before, the past, what brushstrokes can't repair. In the divorce, I gave up half my books. My inner shelves were left in disrepair. We discuss our exes now in calmer voices. At first we cried, whispered, hissed, repair. Scanning again the 7 deadly sins, my devil heart feels they list repair. I've had to go for love like Sappho's scraps. I've cracked, been lost, dismissed repair. The rain falls from the sky in disrepair, I write, as if the words promised repair. Okay, and as I mentioned, I'm gonna read the last poem in this book. I want to thank Joan. I want to thank Marilyn and Penelope. Looking forward to your reading, and all of you for making time to be here, for making time for poetry. No matter where I've lived, who I've built community with, I feel like the value of taking the time to step out of ourselves and kind of like spend time with ourselves, spend time with the world, spend time with the things that with our souls, right? The things people don't pay us to take care of. Um, it's so important. It's so important. So whatever you've had to survive to get to this point, thank you. It's an honor to be here. This last poem is entitled Questions After the Election. In her story about being told by her white bosses, white secretaries, vote Trump, you better vote Trump, as she punched out from work, as usual, tired and body sore. Does my mother know she gathered the darkness of each corner of the factory and the darkness of the drive home, switching between stations, nothing sounding right, and the darkness in her mind, listing all the work waiting for her at home, and the darkness of the night over Corpus Christi, and how these darknesses spill over now into every word I'm urged to write. Because nights like these are ink, and her story of pretending not to hear, but telling me what she heard, what was said, is a story of darknesses being separated, made distinct as words on a page, which holds darkness in one form until we close our eyes and darkness shifts to darkness shifted. At the end of her shift, does she know about the darkness I will hold for her? Thank you. Thank you very much, y'all.